What's your craziest NSFW story that happened at work? Story 1. Dude in the area killed his wife, brought her to my company's parking garage and set her on fire. I noticed something was up when someone ran out with a fire extinguisher. Then the fire dep came. Then the police wasn't hard to catch the guy, of course, but it so happened my coworker was taking a nap in his car in the parking garage, right next to where the aforementioned post-mortem spousal desecration occurred. Slightly longer story, slightly shorter. We didn't see him for a few hours. Obviously got kind of worried given the situation, only to find out he'd been woken up and informed he was momentarily a person of interest in a first-degree murder. Story 2, a guy I worked with was at an old lady's house to do some electrical work, and he had to move a bookshelf. When he moved it, a bag fell and landed on his foot, breaking one of his toes. When he looked into the bag, he saw that it was full of gigantic dildos. When he reported the incident to the company, he wrote, "A literal bag of dicks crushed my foot." Those incident reports go all the way to the CEO of the company. And when he was visiting our office one time, he asked us where he could find the fellow with the dick bag. Story 3. I work in a manufacturing factory that uses a lot of robots to assemble pieces together. The machinery has all sorts of cages, barriers, and safety lockouts to prevent people from injuring themselves. One day, a box had gotten stuck inside the machine and wouldn't come out. So a worker disabled every safety mechanism and started crawling through a narrow path in the equipment, similar to the size of a ventilation shaft in a Die Hard movie, so that he could clear the box from being jammed. Got fired immediately. Story 4. I used to do IT support for a charity that supplied housing and support for homeless people. A large proportion also had mental health issues, so there were a fair amount of interesting events that happened. Being in IT, I avoided experiencing most of it firsthand, though I was threatened with being stabbed on about my third day. Anyway, I come in one Monday and there's an email labeled urgent saying there was an incident at the stairwell of one of the properties on Sunday night. And could I pull the relevant CCTV footage and put it on a DVD? I had to do this fairly frequently. I skipped through the footage, find the incident, usually a fight or blatant drug dealing, and burn it to DVD for the police. The email never mentioned what the incident was, so I skip through the footage and watch as a clearly very agitated man ties a rope around a stair rail at the top of the stairs, then his neck looks over the rail and then just casually tips forward over it. The rope flipped him around and he dangled there twitching for far too long before he just stopped. So yeah, that was pretty NSFW. Story 5. The guy I replaced at my heavy equipment job was fired because apparently he was jerking off in his excavator at night during the 6 p.m., 6 a.m. shift. Nobody knew about it until he accidentally sent the picture's video to our boss instead of his girlfriend. They literally hired a company to come steam clean the cab of that CAT 390. Story 6. At the medical examiner. My friend was dragging a body bag down the hall and I asked what she was doing. She said she was taking the heads out of the freezer for a particular doctor. I asked, "That's a bag of heads?" She said, "Yeah." So I asked if I can open the bag, thinking surely this would be pig heads. I open the bag and there's a bunch of humans' heads. For the same experiment, they shot the heads with some weapons in a lab upstairs. But it's not like a weapons lab, it's just an old lab, so now there's holes in the walls. Turns out heads only cost $600 for science projects. Story 7. Lovely senior coworker of mine, Barbara. She had full-blown ADHD, but she was super peppy, loved talking to people, decorated the office and everything. One day I'm going out with another group of my coworkers and we turn to say goodbye. Babs jumps up from her seat. "You ladies heading out for a party? Without me? I can be fun too, you know." In the span of 2 seconds, she undoes her bra from underneath her shirt, whips it out from one sleeve, and lassos it around. Her boss is sitting right behind her in a cubicle with fully transparent glass walls. We hastily say our goodbyes and urge her to put her bra away before she gets in trouble. She reluctantly tucks it away in her bag. She was fired shortly afterwards because she frequently misplaced things, forgot to schedule appointments, and needed reminders for just about everything. I miss her a lot. Story 8. Been working at a mental hospital as a cook for a few months. Recently, while I was serving lunch to all the other patients, one of them decided to crawl into the dish pit. I heard groaning near the end of my line of patients. Go to the dish pit, look around the corner, and there's blood everywhere. slit his wrists and throat. I ran for help. He grabbed the knife and was keeping us from getting it away from him. Then he gutted himself. I didn't see that part. Eventually, they got the knife from him and an ambulance showed up, but he died shortly after. Horrific. Editing this in, I realize I should maybe change it to dish pit or dish room, but I'm really enjoying the dipshit dish pit stuff we got going on, which is really nice. Story 9. The HR manager at one place I worked got fired after being caught masturbating in her office. That part's not that crazy. The crazy part was she had a camera installed in the men's restroom and was watching men's backs while they used the urinals. Story 10. When I, or 42M, was 19, I worked as a line cook at Applebee's, and we had a cleaning crew come in that night towards the end of the shift to clean the vents above the grill and fryers. One of the guys was taking off the vent above the fryer station, and he for some reason stood braced on the sides of the fryer, assuming they were cooled down. They were not. They were probed still above 285, 300. His foot slipped and went into the fryer all the way up above his ankle, submerging his work boot. He immediately pulled his foot out, screamed, and then in a panic, pulled his boot off. To our fucking horror, when he pulled his boot off, his sock came off 3/4 of the way, along with his skin on his foot. Craziest shit I had ever seen. The fryers were only turned off for about 10 min before he had slipped. Story 11. We had a woman start an overnight clerical job, just doing data entry type of stuff. Pretty basic. Day 1 of training by me, we set her up at the computer. I ask her to go ahead and log in. She doesn't understand what I mean. I tell her use the mouse or hit a button on the keyboard to bring up the login fields. She manages to get through this part. I tell her to double-click on warehouse management software. She doesn't understand what I mean by double-click. I tell her use the mouse. She doesn't know what I mean by the mouse. Okay. She may have overstated her abilities in the interview, but whatever, we need help. Fast forward 2 weeks and she was fired. It turns out she was fucking guys in the locker room for payment and got caught. Real classy lady. Story 12. 2 people were escorted out because they were caught having sex in one of the stalls. Worked at a very large factory, 15,000, 20,000 people per shift. A section supervisor went into the bathroom to piss and heard the woman getting her cheeks clapped. She then tried to say she was helping him tie his shoes. They were both banned for life and not allowed to work for any of the company's suppliers. Then there was the guy who got decapitated, but production ran as normal. They just put caution tape around where he was killed and waited for paramedics to move him. Story 13. I used to work in an ER as a security guard. One night, the doors open and this teenager walks in covered in blood and bleeding from his head. I called a trauma response and we got him back to be stabilized and his head stitched back together. Turns out he drove out to the parking garage on site and tried to blow his brains out, but he flinched, and when pulling the trigger, it went up and missed the top part of his brain. Incredibly lucky. When his parents got there, they both broke down and were so devastated. His girlfriend had cheated on him. He got fired from his job and he got denied for the college he was hoping to get into. Just one thing after another. Just another day in the ER. Story 14. Guy went into the women's toilets and tried to steal a sanitary bin, the bin for used period products, but got chased out. He then ran into the baby changing unit and stole the dirty nappy bin instead. Then he dashed into the gents and dumped the dirty nappies on the floor, proceeding to smear them all over himself while furiously masturbating. Staff blocked off the entrance to the hallway while they waited for security to arrive. But the fella bounced out the gents and down a fire escape before he could be stopped. Disappeared down a back street like a 6-foot skid mark on legs, never to be seen again. I thankfully was not on shift that day, but there was a certain 1,000-yard stare on the people that were. Nobody in that entire building was paid enough to deal with that. Story 15. Worked a crappy building security job years and years ago. On a night shift, my coworker came into the security center laughing and said that while in the lobby, he called an elevator, and when it opened, there was a man and woman in there fucking. The guy didn't stop or make eye contact, just kept pounding, while the woman, who was standing bent over, was trying to close the elevator button while moaning and groaning, but kept hitting the open button while my coworker stood there in shock. I guess this went on for a minute before she said, "Fuck it," and just kept fucking while looking dead into his eyes, getting off, and then the elevator door closed. He called another elevator, but it was empty. Story 16. Not my workplace, but in a warehouse across the street, some poor guy was crushed by a pallet of wine. Don't know how. Don't know why. All I know is that he was in his early to mid 40s and a week from retirement because his wife came into an unexpected inheritance. Poor guy made me think of every action movie where a cop is killed a few weeks from retirement. Only instead of bullets, it was a pallet of wine. Edit, it was a pallet of wine, not a pallet of win. Obviously. Story 17. When I worked at a grocery store, we had an older lady pass out and die in the foyer during a particularly hot summer day. She was lying there for about 2-3 minutes before anyone realized what happened. I'm not sure if she was dead when we saw her, but the ambulance drove away without sirens, so presumably she died, or was already dead, inside the ambulance in our parking lot. I don't remember her name, but we did see the obituary, which confirmed she was 92 years old. Now that I'm older, I'm genuinely curious why a 92-year-old would be doing their own shopping in the middle of a heat wave. I feel like that's gotta be the most NSFW thing in my work experience since it involves death. But I did lose my virginity in a ladies' restroom stall while employed at that same store, so that might fit this thread better. Then there was the mystery poop in the dairy aisle. Story 18. I worked at a commercial dubbing facility in LA 2008. At the time, we would duplicate commercials or media on DVDs with location-specific information, i.e. a Lexus commercial with local dealer info, etc. So my job was to spot check QC, quality control, the DVDs or tapes to ensure they didn't have any artifacts, issues. Well, one day I had a job to review an investor video for Callahan Golf Clubs. 6 DVDs were produced, labeled and everything for board meetings, etc. So the first video was good, guy talking new product, etc. The next one I reviewed was different. It started with a couple of dwarfs in clown makeup. A man and woman. I search forward a minute or so, and lo and behold, the clown dwarfs start fucking. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke or test. So I checked the remaining 5 DVDs and found one more in the stack. Someone at the company had duplicated some fucked up porn for private use, and it got into the mix. It caused a bit of a shitstorm. Management called a group meeting notifying the facility workers what had happened. Of course, no one confessed, but I can only imagine what would have happened if those videos had been delivered LMAO. Story 19. Retail worker here, it's hard to pin down the craziest, but former worker comes in high as a kite on something one evening and heads upstairs, offices, break room, etc. She strips down naked in the hallway, lays down in front of the time clock, and proceeds to piss and masturbate right there on the floor. It was a little later, so not a ton of workers on the clock, but finally an older employee walks in on it and tells her she shouldn't be doing that, and it was all caught on security cameras. Edit, since a few people have asked. Not my store, but a buddy who was involved when it happened at a different location. He was up doing office work when someone went racing past the office door. Another manager in hot pursuit. Other manager yells for help, so friend takes it after them. Figures out the man running found the roof access stairs and had made it up and out them. Get to the roof, man is completely naked, threatening to jump. Not a tall building. They are able to tackle him and hold him until authorities arrive. All the while, naked man's dong flopping around in my friend's face. Story 20. I worked at a very buttoned-up corporate company in sales. I have pretty bad IBS, and although good at sales, I always had nervous turds, which meant frequent bathroom trips. But this one guy from the office would always masturbate in the restroom. I'm talking dead quiet. Shweesh, shweesh, shweesh. The problem was, he was a guy that talked to everyone and leaned on their desks, carrying around his water bottle. But every single dude knew he was doing it. I brought it up to a coworker in another department, and he was like, "Yeah, that's Dan. Everyone knows, but you can't really turn him in because there's no proof." Which was true. How do you bring proof to management of a guy jerking his gherkin in a bathroom stall? I was glad I worked on the road 80% of the time. Story 21. A place where I worked, and my mother still works at, had a manager who was always kind of suspected to be fooling around with the young seasonal hires. The man is in his 40s and on his second marriage, kids from both of their previous marriages, and I think 1 or 2 together, something like 7, 8 kids. It was one of those situations where it's clear something was going on, but no one ever had proof and no one wanted to risk getting fired or picked on for saying anything, or just wanted to keep out of it altogether. It blew up in his face just earlier this year when he was caught with one of the young ladies by two others behind a compost pile. Story 22. Started working at a big bank in NYC after graduating college. Large skyscraper, many different tenants, so you had to badge through security to access your elevator. Important for later. First day on the job, I'm introducing myself to the team and find out an analyst hired the previous year also graduated from the same school as me. Cool. We became work friends, and pretty routinely I would eat lunch with her and two guys from a different department. Fast forward 6 months, I come in one morning and my boss is visibly distraught. I don't think too much of it, grab a coffee, and soon after two security personnel approach us with boxes, walk directly to the analyst sitting beside me, and ask her to grab her belongings and then proceed to walk her off the floor. I look at my boss like WTF, but she refuses to tell me anything. Immediately, I ping the guys and ask if they're down for lunch. One responds, sure, for our normal time. We sit down for lunch, and I ask where Guy 2 is, and he says, well, here's the thing. Analyst and Guy 2 apparently went out for drinks last night, decided to come back and fuck in the office. They're both fired. Security discovered badge scans at 2 a.m. and a used condom in the stairwell. Story 23. In high school, many years ago, I worked at a Papa John's as a delivery guy. It was managed by two mid-30s dudes who were just trashy, fuck-up slimeballs. One of these guys eventually started a relationship with another high school coworker who was underage. Well, there was an office with one of those one-way mirror windows, but if you got close enough to it from the outside, you could see in a tiny bit. Or at least make out figures or what people were doing, but shadowy. Another coworker caught the two having a nice bang out on the office desk. Reported, both fired. Guy got charges pressed and went to prison for the underage bit. I still love those cheese stick pizzas, so not all was lost.